I hope everybody here is ready to hear some good words about newspaper weather blogs, at least here in Virginia. That's a pretty rare breed these days. You can go online and find out all the weather blogs you want, but to find ones that are attached to a newspaper is rather rare. So we're going to discuss that tonight. I've got two distinguished gentlemen with me that I'll introduce here in a second. But just for those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris White, and I actually am from Virginia, but I really never lived in Virginia. I'm a military brat. But once I got out of school, or got out of high school and went to college, I was looking for something to do with weather. And of course, in Virginia, where I needed to go, there were no schools at that time in the dark ages that had meteorology. So I wound up coming out of Virginia Tech with a general education, science education degree, taught earth science education for a whole year before I decided I didn't want to be a public school teacher. God bless them. And then I wound up going to work for the Defense Department as a staff scientist. But I was always the weather geek. I was always the office guy. You know, the people would come to talk about weather. Got into storm chasing back in 2002. We might go down that road in a little bit. We can talk some. But as of the moment, I've been retired from federal government for quite a while, and as a result, I was able to, while I worked there, I was able to live in Northern Virginia for 35 years. So I started a weather blog up in that neighborhood, and because of some contacts I had with a local newspaper in Fredericksburg, which is the Freelance Star, I wrote the blog on my own for about a year, poked on them for a while, and then they started hosting my blog in 2010. And then I've been writing it ever since. So I've been, this April will be, if I do the math right, 8 years since I started that blog up, just because I felt like the Fredericksburg area needed some more coverage. We'll talk some more about that. That's enough about me. So to go left to right on my screen, my little icons, I've got John Boyer in Richmond with the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And so, John, if you just give us a little quick background about you.
All right, here's the bio. I am Virginia, born and raised Roanoke Valley, and also looked at Virginia Tech, and actually ended up going with NC State. That's where I got my meteorology degree. Broadcast path. Broadcast was something that was always top of my list, just from when I was a little kid all the way up. So I lived the dream. You know, I worked at a TV station in Georgia. That's kind of, you know, the one where you break in. And then I hadn't even thought that I was going to end up working in Oklahoma someday. I always thought I was going to be an East Coast guy. So here I was looking at East Coast cities and stations, and saw a chance in Oklahoma. A friend of mine that I studied from, Nate Johnson at WRAL, he's like, you should go work for this James Adelot guy in Tulsa. Apply for that posting. It's like, okay, I'll do it. And sure enough, they wanted me there, and I went, and I loved it, and I learned everything about severe weather in the plains that, you know, obviously it's a different animal than East Coast. So the past 3 years, 2013 through 2016, I was doing weekend weather at the Fox affiliate in Tulsa. A great education, great people, and then looked around, thought maybe I can do weather in a different kind of way. Let's explore what I can do, maybe outside of TV. And saw a amazing, looked like a dream job at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and I was lucky enough to. That's where I'm at right now, and I started there in November. And we're starting up a weather coverage section, both in print and online. And we had our first big event last weekend. So that's my bio in 3 minutes. And how about me? Cool.
All right. Well, now we switch our attention to the grizzled veteran of the group. Kevin Myatt of the Roanoke Times has been doing weather blog there for quite a number of years. So Kevin, why don't you fill us in on your background?
Well, John just talked about he had a few years in Tornado Alley. I grew up in kind of the gutter of Tornado Alley, the eastern fringe of it in northeast Arkansas. Lived there for many years into my 20s. We had a lot of tornadoes, a little bit, but not much snow. As I was growing up, I developed an interest in weather. That was kind of my main thing. I thought I was going to be a meteorologist. That's what I went all through school with, but I found this other area of interest, area of ability in writing and journalism. So I went the journalism route. I worked at the newspaper in Northeast Arkansas, went to school locally there, Arkansas State, got a journalism degree, went to another little paper to be editor. And in 1999, I answered an ad, kind of like John, talking about looking around for something else. I kind of wanted to go somewhere else, so I answered an ad for a copy editor in Roanoke, Virginia, at the Roanoke Times, and I came to work there in just barely before Y2K happened. But as time developed, people, this thing had been kind of on the back burner, the weather interest. People discovered it, including editor of the paper, and asked me to do a online column, which I did for a little bit. Then we had a paper redesign, and they needed material for a new section in Virginia, so that's how Weather Journal column started in the newspaper. And 3 years later, 2006, is when the weather blog started. That it's been going on. What is that? 11 years almost now.
Right.
So I've been at it more than a decade now, doing the weather blog, and that's, I got into storm chasing as well. Chris and I have been on a few Virginia Tech trips together. So that's kind of the way it all got going for me.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you, to give us the people who may want to watch this an idea of some of the vagaries or different parts of the state and what the weather's like. We'll start with you, Kevin, if you want to talk about here in Roanoke, what's this specific market, the market you write for, what's the coverage area? I mean, and what are some of the factors that affect it, and what are some of the toughest challenges you have?
Of course, the Southwest Virginia area, that Roanoke and New River Valleys is generally what Roanoke, Blacksburg, Christiansburg, Pulaski, etc., is generally the area that I write about, blog about. We have where the Blue Ridge, the Allegheny Mountains to the west, the Blue Ridge kind of through the middle, and the Piedmont to the east, and this creates a lot of challenges with downsloping winds, upsloping winds in various situations. It can dry us out. It can make us wet. The mountains trap cold air. That can radically change a forecast. There are times when it seems like it's mild on the other side of the mountains, and it comes over here, and the moisture comes over, and we have ice and snow. Or in the summer, we have one 90-degree day, and the next day the high is 68 because of this banked-in cool air. So this creates the mountains, of course, are the number one challenge, how the wind flows over, around, beside them, and it creates a lot of forecast headaches sometimes. Okay.
How about Richmond? I know you haven't been there a real long, John, but being a Virginia native, you know something about it just from having lived around.
That's true. I lived upstream, but all the big storms that people talk about and remember in Richmond, a lot of those are the same storms that I remember being in or hearing about, or when I lived away from home in other states, having to text my folks about, because that's how it goes. You can be a time zone away, but you're a meteorologist, so your sister and your dad are like, hey, so what's really going to happen with this snow this weekend? So I haven't been too out of the loop. I did miss the big January snow. I was in Oklahoma for that one. But obviously there's a heavy Richmond focus on what we're doing at the Times-Dispatch, but we have readers in print and online almost all over the state. So what you would consider the middle part of the state. Central Virginia is kind of a fuzzy term, but east of the Blue Ridge, all the way to the Chesapeake Bay, maybe not so much of a focus on Hampton Roads. They are covered by a lot of different weather providers as well. But what I find really interesting is we have some very loyal people who've already contacted me who are really into weather, and they live in some of the smaller towns in the Piedmont, like Crewe or South Hill or extending north. And so I kind of see the middle part of Virginia as the main part of what we're looking at. And the forecast challenges, obviously, when it comes to winter, there's always the concept of the cutoff or the boundary, the rain-snow line. In this case, this past weekend, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it was kind of the opposite, where it was heavier southeast, less northwest. And the other thing that really makes Richmond a compelling and also kind of a challenging place is there aren't a lot of cities in America where you can, within a year, have a reasonable chance of having to deal with real severe weather, tornado watches, maybe some warnings in your metro area, winter weather, and tropical weather. I mean, maybe not a Hurricane Isabel every year, but at least tropical storm force winds at some point trying to cut into Eastern Virginia. That's a pretty common thing. So kind of having to keep sharp on tropical meteorology, severe meteorology and winter meteorology, because you know you're going to deal with it pretty much annually.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a range there, and that
Yeah.
kind of folds into
Yeah.
why I started the weather blog. I guess of the three of us, I'm the odd man out because I'm not an employee of the paper. I'm a vendor, an independent contractor. I write the blogs and submit them to the paper, and then they put them online. The reason I started writing the weather blog is having lived in Fredericksburg for a number of years. If you look at a map of the television coverage, the DMAs, Fredericksburg is right on the edge. It lives on the seam between the Richmond and the Washington, D.C. markets. Then if you look at the National Weather Service county warning areas, CWAs, again, Fredericksburg is right on the seam of those two coverage areas. And it always seemed like we in the Fredericksburg area got short shrift when it was dealing with weather, unless some major event like a snowstorm was the bullseye on Fredericksburg, or a severe storm maybe went through that particular area. So, in fact, I found myself at times when talking about television coverage, our cable connector, our cable provider actually provided TV from Richmond and DC. So what I would do, I would pick a station in DC, for instance, watch the weather coverage, quickly flip over to Richmond, get their weather coverage, and average it, and come pretty close to what Fredericksburg was. And of course, that, as we've all said, there in the wintertime, that can get pretty interesting. So I started writing the blog all on my own, as I said before, just because I felt like the area needed some coverage. Because there are a lot of specifics to that area. When I say the area, I'm talking about the city of Fredericksburg, which is a booming population in and of itself, and the surrounding counties, which would be Stafford, Spotsylvania, Caroline, and King George. And that area has exploded over the last 30 years in population. And it's an area that's very heavily weighted toward commuters, people that commute both to Washington and to Richmond. So road conditions are very important. Of course, obviously, schools in the wintertime have some things to be dealt with, as just like all areas do. So it's a very niche market. It's rather small geographically, but that area, especially in the wintertime, almost always tends to be set up on the rain snow line. And DC stations, the DC forecast would call for snow. Richmond and Petersburg would call for rain. In Fredericksburg, many times we get anything between it. Snow, sleet, rain, freezing rain. Who knows what else. So the challenges there are very interesting, and I find that one of it's talking about challenges besides winter weather. Kevin mentioned the wedge. Cold air damming always seems to put a dividing line between Fredericksburg and everybody else at certain times of the year, and it's made worse by how close it is to the Chesapeake Bay, for one. Obviously, the Atlantic is, Richmond is affected by that as well. And then one other little small factor that most people don't realize is the Potomac River is not that far away, and it's over a mile wide. So you get a northeast wind coming across there, and it can really drop temperatures or raise temperatures depending on the season. So that's why I started writing the blog. And when I do put a forecast together, which I don't do a lot of forecasting, we'll talk about maybe that a little bit. I do differ with the National Weather Service. I'll point out why. So that's kind of where I come out with the weather blog and why it's important. Having mentioned television coverage, let me just throw this question out there to be discussed. Why do you think, or what's the benefits of having newspaper weather blogs versus television weather coverage of an area?
Time and space. I mean, TV, as John probably knows, TV guys have 4 minutes to tell you everything about everything, and we have, with a blog or something written, we can go on as long as we need to. Hopefully, not too long to bore people, but long enough to explain in detail and go into various scenarios. As you know, especially with winter weather, we're dealing with 3-4 possible scenarios up to 12-18 hours before a storm sometimes, and TV guys just don't have time to do that, but we do.
Yeah, both really have some strengths, but as you mentioned, Kevin, when it comes to a publication, you have time to sit down and make sure you're really focused on what's going out. In TV, there are a lot of time pressures and time limits, and I'm human. Everybody's human. You know, you get through with the weathercast and think, oh, I forgot to mention that. And you can't really go back and put the genie back in the bottle, maybe. It doesn't happen every day. But that's one example of strength of one piece of, or one story that has all of your thoughts, all in the order you want it, and that other people have looked at and say, yeah, this makes sense to me. So I hope that people find, as you said, that it's more comprehensive and more detailed, because sometimes a weathercast goes by fast. You have to run back into the kitchen for something, you miss something. So hopefully it's all there in one place that people can enjoy it.
Okay. And it's something that I think mainly because of recent advances in technology, bandwidth and things like, and more apps available for opportunities. Do either one of you have any experience or have had experience with doing these online blogs and in posting video clips, or is there an interest in doing that in the future, do you think?
I think we're going to see more video going forward. That's something that's a big part of what we're doing here at the Times-Dispatch. There is a column in the paper, and that story also appears online, but there are also going to be videos, recorded videos that kind of explain why something is happening, why the air is dry, why the storm tracks are going to look a certain way, or ones that address a certain forecast, like, hey, we got a big festival this weekend, here's what's going on. Or one thing we just tried out this past weekend with the winter storm is Facebook Live. That's something I don't see going away anytime soon, and it has its own unique opportunities to reach people in a new way. So video is a part of what I'm doing, and I don't see that going away.
About, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, we had something called Timescast that was kind of like a little newscast that we would do with news, weather, and sports, just like TV. It went away, but various forms of video have been used on Roanoke.com. I don't personally institute a lot of it myself, but we probably will see some Facebook Live, as John mentioned, that we will use, and certainly any way we can use video. In this modern era, a lot of the lines are blurred. TV people are having to do TV people and newspaper people are kind of all in the same social media internet universe. So it's going to be interesting how these things kind of blur into each other.
Right, and that was my general impression too. Not being an employee of the paper and not hearing discussions that are going on, back and forth. I don't know what all the plans are, but one of the unique situations in Fredericksburg is there's really no competing television station. There's as I said, the DC and the Richmond markets. There are a couple of cable channels, which that also provides another avenue that I think that weather coverage could be provided. To date, I don't think it has been in that area. But I could see video even in Fredericksburg being a good medium, because hey, people like to watch watch videos, and they like to look at their phone, and fortunately or unfortunately, and we'll get into talking about writing the blogs. A lot of people don't like to read a lot; they want to be told. So I can see where video would be an important media for all that. Speaking of the blog post itself, why don't we just take a couple of minutes or a few minutes, depending on how long it takes you, and just go through the process. And we'll start with you, Kevin. We'll go through the process of when you write a blog post. What do you do? Where do you start? What do you look at? How do you structure the blog post? How often do you update it? All those kind of things.
I have a lot of freedom in my setup. I can update as little or as much as I need to, and it varies through different times of the year. Updating multiple times a day in the most recent winter storm. Sometimes in the summer we get in these hot, dry or hot, humid patterns. Either one, the weather's the same day after day. I just, 2 or 3 times a week. Ideally, I'm kind of in a constant state of looking at the models, forecasts, various, I look at a lot of the government agencies, the Weather Service, Storm Prediction Center, look at the models, read the discussions. I try to just be constantly in the know, so to speak, especially as it's focused on Virginia and Southwest Virginia. And the process, I'm not going to tell you there's any kind of magic formula here. I try to boil it down to this is what we expect to happen. This is what may happen. Looking down the road, these are potentials, a week, even 2 weeks out sometimes, just in general. And I try to focus the blog on what I think is the most interesting and most important element. Sometimes that's not hard. Obviously, we have snow. That's everybody's biggest concern around here. But sometimes it's a little more challenging. It's 85 degrees and sunny every day with afternoon thunderstorms. What is there out there that people need to be paying attention to?
I would echo exactly what Kevin said. What is the most interesting thing going on that day or that week? And if it's snow, tornadoes, hurricanes, that's going to be it. Either the run up to it or afterwards. Why did that happen that way? Or, some next day story that, explains a little bit about why. I find that interesting. And if I can show other people why that's interesting too, or if they're already interested in it, that's where we have that connection. And in those weeks and times of year where nothing's going on, you develop ideas for things that of just general interest about the atmosphere. There's always something interesting going on in the state or in our country or in the world, and there's never an end to the variety of weather that there is that can be interesting to people and explained. So the stretches of quiet weather, I think are easier to deal with when you have the freedom of a weather blog over a format where you have to stay confined to one 5-day period and one set of counties.
Right. and I echo all the above. As I started to get into a little while ago, when I actually sit down to write a blog post, it's depends on the weather situation, as you both have said. If it's something impending, whether it's a snowstorm, severe weather, something that's very time critical, then obviously you have to kind of, be situationally aware, but you can't take a lot of time to think as much as you would when the weather's quiet. But typically what I do is, I'll look at the National Weather Service, and then I'll start looking at the models, and I may even peek at some of the social media posts that are going on with other people in the weather enterprise, just to kind of get a feel for what they're thinking. And then I would say probably for my blog posts, it might be 25% me looking at models and forecasting, 25% me looking at the National Weather Service, and then 50%, the rest of it, just figuring out what's the most interesting part about it to write about. What are people going to be interested in? I think as both of you have said, the winter weather piece is extremely interesting to people because it has such impacts. It impacts people's the schools, impacts the roads, the commutes, it impacts so many things. So obviously they're going to want to hear about that. But as John said, in the quiet periods, what I see that, and that's kind of my main emphasis, if you would, for the blog, other than those really busy times, is education. Why did this happen? Why is all this? Does the temperature going to look the same? Temperature, humidity going to look the same for the next 5 days? Why isn't it changing, or why is it going to change? And to do that, I obviously I don't want to ramble on and on forever in a blog. There's this kind of a little formula I have is you can't put so many paragraphs together, and they got to be short and all that. So what I'll do is I'll use hyperlinks, to other, if you want to know more, click here kind of thing. And usually we'll relate back to either a National Weather Service site or some educational website about weather that'll talk a little bit more about it. So I feel like the educational piece is a big part of it as well. How about you guys?
Absolutely agree.
Well, no, definitely would agree. And that kind of spins off into some things that you get invited to do, to talk to schools and college classes and such, and helping people to know more about the weather every day.
And then speaking of engaging with the people along those lines, I know, Kevin, I know you have a very vibrant discussion with your readers, and you get a lot of feedback. Did that start easily, or how did that begin, and how did that progress for you?
It started slowly. It's kind of like a snowball, to use a weather analogy, just a little bit at a time. At first, people, hey, there's a weather blog. There's a weather column. What paper has a weather column? Back in the 2000, before 2010, there definitely weren't very many papers that had weather columns, and I started about the same time as Capital Weather Gang in Washington, which is one of the more well-known ones.
Right.
But over time, at first it was kind of like everybody knew each other. There was like a little community of people, and everybody knew each other. But the 2009-10 winter was sort of when the blog blew up. We had, if you remember, we had snow. We had 3 big snowstorms that winter, and it was pretty much here in Roanoke area. It was pretty much wide, almost like it would be in Maine from one end of the season to the other. And there was vast interest. Suddenly, went up to tens of thousands regularly, and that little community kind of filtered out, and I started having a lot more people and commenting and visiting, and from that point on, it's gained a lot of momentum, and the paper's done a lot to promote it, and it's been a really big blessing.
Yeah. Fortuitously, when I started the weather blog, the blog that I started writing was in April of 2009. So that winter, you're right, that garnered a lot of attention with that winter, because I think in Fredericksburg, if I remember right, we had over 50 inches of snow that winter, which is more than 3 times the amount of average. So there was a lot of interest that just kind of came out of that. But how about you, John? I know you haven't been at the Richmond Times-Dispatch long, but how about your interaction with readers?
It's early days, but it's all been really great, and I, love to build that kind of community of not just the people who are really passionate about weather, but the people who are really passionate about science and other fields, but the weather affects them, and that's a place where you can trade ideas. Just having a really good conversation with somebody who was in the medical field about statistics and accuracy and verification, and I think it's great to talk to people who love weather, but you really learn a lot when you speak to people in other disciplines too and get their perspective. So I would love to do more of that kind of thing. And again, it's just been about 2 months, but obviously the Times-Dispatch has a very large and loyal base of readers, and I think they were really hungry for extra weather. I'm the first meteorologist that's been in a role like this at the Times-Dispatch, so this is something totally new, and I think it's really clicked with a lot of people. I've heard from them who've been very, very nice, and would love to see it grow and continue to hear more from people.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I'd like to have more of that too. I have a little bit of interaction with readers back. I don't know. I'll go back 3 or 4 years. The Fredericksburg paper, the Freelance Star, has been through a couple of ownership changes here in the last couple of years, so things have been in flux. But about 3 years ago, roughly, there really wasn't a lot of push to put things out on social media and to get it out there. So I basically kind of bootstrapped it. And, I set up on my own Facebook page. Actually, I had a Facebook page and just set up one called it Fredericksburg Weather, for lack of a better term. And I started pushing it out on my Twitter account. And I'll get some interaction on that Facebook page with readers. But when the paper now, they've really gotten more into the social media piece. They start pushing things out on the Fredericksburg.com page, which is the Freelance Stars page. They get interaction on there, but that's since I don't work for the paper and I don't represent them, I don't really have that kind of interaction on that page. So the interaction I do have with some of the readers is limited based on the early social media stuff I did. But I eventually would love to get to a point where Kevin is, where he has a really good rapport with folks. And speaking of rapport with folks or talking to people, how do you deal with, and maybe Kevin's the one to talk to since he's been there the longest, how do you deal with what does James Spann calls them, the trolls, haters, and know-it-alls?
Well, the first thing, I'm always trying to be polite to everyone. I'm not there to snap back at people. Over the years, I think people have learned that I have pretty strict rules on commenting on my blog. No calling names, no cussing, no politics. You'd be surprised how quickly people get in a political argument over anything. But if you're going to talk about global warming on my blog, you have to talk about it scientifically, the science and the evidence and the data. You can't talk about Bush and Obama and Trump or anybody else. So I don't get just a whole lot of trolling. I seem to get more on Twitter and Facebook sometimes. But that's pretty much the way I deal with them. And if somebody brings a point up, I will bring up the something that's critical. I will either agree with them that yes, that could have been better, and here's why, or I will show them why I think their point is not valid. So just being honest and polite is 80% of it.
Yeah, the world needs more civility. So, well put.
Amen. Amen. I've seen some of Kevin's interactions with people, and I commend you for the way you handle it. I think it's a really good way to do it. And again, going back to interacting with folks and knowing, John, that you're a little handicapped in that it's only been a couple of months. Are you getting a feel for what kind of, or the set of FAQs, frequently asked questions, that people ask in your market about weather?
Frequently asked questions. So far, it's kind of ranged. Maybe having the one big snow event put the focus on snow this past week, but I can't say that I have a list of FAQs that's specific to this city. They're general FAQs. What did you have to study? Or when you're talking to other people who really like weather, sometimes you swap tales about what's the storm that got you interested in weather. And actually, I'd be curious to talk to you both about that, because I always love hearing about that moment for other meteorologists and other people who are passionate about weather, because it often does seem to come down to one storm or one weather event, doesn't it?
Kevin, you want to answer that? I've got a couple things, but go ahead.
What probably initially got me interested in weather is when my mother held me out the back door to look at a tornado on the horizon in the 1975 outbreak in Arkansas, doing probably what the Weather Service would tell you not to do, especially with a child. But and the fact that my city had been hit by 2 EF4s in the previous 8 years. And then it just so happened that when I was early elementary school, we had these very severe winters, and they're severe nationally, late 70s, famous for very cold and lots of snow. And it was a pretty large amount of snow for Northeast Arkansas, not compared to other places, but I got to see a lot of winter weather, and those events just stoked it into my heart then that, snow and severe weather interests, and that led to just an overall weather interest.
So you sure your mom wasn't holding you out the door because you had a messy diaper or something?
I was 5 by that time, so I would hope not.
Yeah, I guess for me, having lived in a number of different areas, both here in the U.S. and other places in other countries, I was exposed to a lot of different weather and climates, everything from, I will say that, and Kevin would be able to figure this out just by the fact, my opinion about cold weather and snow. I never lived any place that was really what I would consider had harsh winters. Most of the places I lived Virginia is probably the harshest, if you want to call it, winter place we've lived. Most of the places were either tropical or subtropical. Even places like California, which can be, have some extremes in and of itself, depending on where you live. But I was exposed to everything from, in growing up, everything from typhoons when we were in, my dad was Air Force. So we were in Okinawa in the 60s, and there was, I remember there was I forget how they numbered. I think it was like typhoon conditions 1 through 4, and the lower the number, the closer the typhoon was. And when it got to typhoon condition 1, they shut everything down. So just like snow days, we got the day off from school because nobody wanted to be out have your kids out on the road in a typhoon. So we had those come along. Then there was obviously severe weather in thunderstorms and stuff in Virginia. And then actually when I was in high school, when I was the last 2 years of high school, we were living in East Africa in what's now the country of Eritrea. At the time, it was still part of Ethiopia. This is back in the dark ages. And every year we had, if it worked right, we had two rainy seasons. It was basically when the intertropical convergence zone went north and when it went back south. And when it would come through every day, like clockwork, 3 o'clock, thunderstorm would pop up. And where we lived was on an escarpment. It was almost 8,000 feet above sea level, even though it wasn't that far from the equator. And because of the dynamics, a lot of the storms would produce hail, and not big hail, but pea-sized hail. And there were several times I saw hail that you could have shoveled. It was inches thick on the ground. So all those kind of things all rolled together, really worked on my interest in. And then, as I said, when I went to school, there really wasn't any school in Virginia that had meteorology. So I wound up working for Uncle Sam. I did take several meteorology courses at the University of Maryland to kind of dip my toe in to see if I wanted to get a master's degree, but I decided not to based on my career goals and family and that kind of stuff. So, but it was I wouldn't say, John, to answer your specific question, I don't think it was any one event. It was just the broad exposure to many different types of weather that got me interested.
That's still amazing, to have that range of experience.
Yeah, it was an interesting growing up period. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So what's yours, John?
I would blame it on snow originally. I'm still a winter weather lover. I like it until it's done falling from the sky, and then afterwards I have no use for it. But the best part of a snowstorm is when the first flake comes in. Anyways, it had to be Storm of the Century 93, and then by blizzard 95, 96. Why did I say 95? I was already hooked. I was the classroom weather nerd and expert by that point. Tropical also came up pretty early on, that hyper season in 1995. We were staying on the North Carolina coast, and I think had to cut short and duck out early in advance of Hurricane Felix. Didn't really ever come on shore, but that was another instance of, hey, here's this force that everybody is paying attention to and everybody is affected by and interested in. So it gives you something to talk about with everybody. So I think if I had to rank them in terms of how it came along as familiarity and interest, would be winter, then hurricanes. Tornadoes were really something academic when you grew up in Southwest Virginia. You don't have sirens, you don't have drills in the schools. Kevin can back me up here. The county I grew up in has had 2 observed touchdowns in the past 67 years. Both of them were minor. So
one of them was pretty recent. If it's Botetourt, right?
Yeah, 2011. Yeah.
Yep.
So tornadoes really didn't become real for me until I was at NC State in 2011. That was spring of my senior year. The April 16th outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
That was too close, and that was too personal. A mile away from my apartment, there was damage. So it's not to say I didn't respect and understand tornadoes before, but that was an education. And then, of course, being in Oklahoma, really getting an education twice in the past 3 years. We had to send our staff downstairs at the TV station because the circulations were getting way too close. I think in both cases, 1.5 miles from the station. So I have not seen a tornado visually. I know, hard to believe. And nor have I chased one. That's another thing I was hoping to hear more from you both about, because I followed some of the chasing exploits. One of my FAQs in Tulsa was, oh, so you go tornado chasing. I have never, not once been, because my job at work was inside the building. It was air traffic control for all of the severe weather coverage. We had a fleet of chasers who were contractors for the station, and a couple of our station employees too, who we would dispatch out. So part of my job was keeping up with them and their movements. So I understand chasing from kind of a secondhand perspective. Here's where you need to be, trying to understand what your limitations are. Here's what we want back in terms of video or content. So that's how I see it.
Well, the weather blog, weather column kind of put me on the radar, so to speak. Steve Cotton at the Weather Service invited me to the Weather Service many years ago when things were just kind of starting with, and he said, hey, there's this guy down in Pulaski is teaching high school. He does storm chases every year. And it wasn't just a few weeks later, I had an invitation from Dave Carroll, who is a Pulaski high school teacher and is now a professor of meteorology at Tech, to go on their storm chase. And I couldn't go that year, but I did the following year and have been 13 chases in 12 years. I got Chris pulled in for a few of them, and I did a little bit of it on my own in Arkansas, late 90s. I've seen about 30 tornadoes visually now, probably 6 or 7 that were really those spectacular, Wizard of Oz quality tornadoes. But that's something I've got to blog about too, is the chases we've been on. And I know Chris, you were talking about chasing for TV, and Chris has done some of that for a couple of different stations.
Yeah, we talk about crossing media here. I kind of make a long story short, because of my interest in weather, it actually kind of trickled down to my son. So when it came time for my son to go to school, go to college, he decided he wanted to go into meteorology. So he went out to Oklahoma, to Norman, for his first 2 years. And he decided after that he didn't want to be a meteorologist. He was interested in storm chasing, but not meteorologist. And there's some other, background behind that. But as a result, in 2002, I flew out to Norman, and my brother, who lives in Texas, drove up, and we packed my son out of his dorm room for the last time. And then we all went chasing on a family chase. And I saw my first tornado on our second day out, kind of by accident. We didn't know what we were doing. And then when I got back to Virginia, I started chasing here. So actually, I've been chasing here in Virginia since 2002, which now I guess makes 15 years if I count it up right. And I've been back out to the plains several times since then, mostly up until about 2011 was my first chase with the Hokies. About every other year after 2002, I had made a trip back out to the plains, again on a family chase, just with my son and or my brother. And it was a fun time. We always, you kind of learn by what not to do, and so we saw some pretty cool sights. But in 2013, after I had moved here to the Roanoke Valley, I actually got a call I was contacted by one of the meteorologists at Channel 6 in Richmond. I had actually, in chasing out of the Fredericksburg area, I had actually been in contact with one of the meteorologists there, and this was several years prior. And he found out that I had moved around, was still chasing, and the new chief meteorologist at Channel 6 wanted to set up a chase team. So he passed my name along, and long story short, I chased a few times in the summer of 2013 for Channel 6, until we both kind of came to a conclusion that it really wasn't practical for me living, 2 hours outside of their DMA before I could actually get to there. And so in the meantime, I went to the National Weather Association meeting in Charleston in 2013, sat next to Robin Reed at the broadcaster conference, and we started talking and kept that conversation going that winter. And in 2014, I started chasing for Channel 7 here in the Roanoke Valley, and I've been chasing with them or for them ever since. It's again as a vendor, independent contractor. I put together actually live stream storms now, so they can show those on air. Anybody can look at them, but they can actually broadcast them on air. So it's been kind of a fun challenge. And yes, I've seen tornadoes here in Virginia, John. You kind of have to go look for them.
You're right, exactly.
They're usually not as photogenic as the ones you see out west. I've seen actually more tornadoes out on the plains than I've seen here. But there's some pretty cool sights. I know Kevin, when he gets a chance, will go out and look at some storms too. He doesn't always get the chance to do that, given family and job responsibilities, right?
Yeah, I go out. I'm good once or twice a spring, summer. Is about as much as I would do. Besides, if I have the chance here in the Roanoke Valley, I'll go to the top of the nearest hill and look at the storm coming in or something. But as far as actually chasing, I have been on some pretty good supercells the last couple of years. One coming through Rocky Mount that went on over to Chris at Chatham, sent it over his way. So, a lot of times in Virginia, as you point out, John, the tornadoes, and Chris did, tornadoes are kind of hard to find. But we have pretty nice storms sometimes, and you'd be surprised the structures that we have here. It's certainly not the scale of the planes or the frequency of the planes, but if you work at it, you can get see something pretty neat every once in a while.
Yeah, well, I suppose I should clarify that you guys have come back with some absolutely amazing pictures. There's a big difference. I think growing up in a valley and all your storms being kind of very narrow experiences. Chasing the storm itself into it actually didn't really occur to me. What I would do once I was able to drive and into college, I would try to photograph the storm from afar. I'd get up on the parkway and find some great overlook. And as these are going out across the Piedmont, get the pictures of the anvils and time lapses. And that's what was really cool to me, is like, hey, that storm is, oh, that's over Alamance County, North Carolina, but I can see it. So I guess I kind of came at it from a not getting up close and personal with it, but seeing it from far away.
Blue Ridge Parkway is one of the great chase roads in America.
Yeah.
Shh, don't tell anybody. It has the pull-offs every once in a while, as you can see, hundreds of miles on a good day. And I've been amazed too. You see, oh, that storm's over Elkins, West Virginia, or something, and it looks like you can reach out and grab it.
Yeah, if you want structure shots, I mean, and there's some pretty good structure, as Kevin says, that's a great place. And if you want to actually chase the storm, there's not too many escape routes off the
That's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah, maybe for pulse storms, it might be a good place to go, but I don't know about your supercells.
Right. Well, speaking of being there in Richmond, John, the station that I was telling you about, when I told them I wasn't going to chase for him anymore just because it wouldn't work logistically, I handed the baton off to another former Hokie storm chaser who actually chases for Channel 6 now. So if you ever catch up with Andrew Smith, let him know. He probably would love to chase with you.
I'll say howdy.
So
there's your story too. That could be a whole column piece or something.
Yeah. You'd have to talk to Andrew about how he got involved with Dave Carroll. It's a pretty funny story. But that brings to mind a question which just popped into my head, which I thought is an interesting question. And John, you mentioned the fact that being in Tulsa, you were kind of at the nerve center, watching everything and keeping everything together on severe storms coverage, but weren't able to get out to look at it. One of the, I wouldn't call it a pet peeve of mine, but I think one of the limitations that I see among forecasters, whether it be television or even National Weather Service, when it comes to storms like that, is many of them don't get out. They don't actually eyeball the storms enough. Mm-hmm. They rely on sensors, radar obviously and satellite, but they actually eyeball the storm and see what it's doing and how. All right, yeah, it looks like this on radar, but it looks like this visually. I find that to be a limitation. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think the introduction and continued growth of storm spotting for television has really been a great thing. I can't speak for everybody, but it's great to have not just one person streaming back a view from a storm, but 3 different views of the same storm. And so you're not up there, you're not feeling the air, you're not smelling it, you're not really getting the sense that you'd like from it. But technology's been a blessing for being able to not just cover the storms, but to understand them. I mean, there are times when you haven't gone on with your wall-to-wall coverage yet, but you're just sitting and you're watching this thing. And it's almost like NFL Red Zone or supercell structure, where you have 5 chaser streams, maybe on a good day, even more than that. And I can't imagine having to do that job without it. Back in the day when, all you had was a radar scope and no visual whatsoever. I really respect, how far we've come and the work that's gone into it.
Well, experiencing the weather is, I found it difficult when I go off somewhere, like I go off on the storm trip, or I go on, leave the state for some reason, and I'm trying to continue the blog. I find it difficult when I'm not here able to see or feel what's going on to do the weather. I think that's a part of what I do, is observing it myself and kind of getting a so-called a feel for it while I'm here. And I found it difficult when I'm hundreds of miles away trying to write a blog for Roanoke. You can look at the models and the radar and like everybody else, but if you're not here with your eyeballs seeing some of it, it loses something.
And I think at the very least, what I would always try to do on severe weather days in Tulsa, and I guess anywhere I am, is get outside of the building every now and then. If you spend the whole 8 hours inside the air conditioning, sometimes that is inescapable based on the kind of duties that you have. but there were actually a lot of times where, you've got a watch issued and you're watching the mesoscale environment and, how far north are these dew points going to make it, and stepping outside and feeling that difference from earlier, and developing an intuition just based on that humidity. It's the same kind of thing, I think, with other kinds of forecasting too. Like, but in particular, yeah, in Tulsa, I did make it a point to try and step outside as often as I could on storm days. Not when tornadoes were actually occurring, because my responsibility is inside the building, but to watch how that day unfolds and just how rapidly you go from, and watching the clouds too. They tell you a lot, and that's not always appreciated. But to see those veering winds, or kind of just eyeball the stratus and say, yeah, that's not going to go anywhere today. We're going to be too stable. Eventually, it starts to click, and that's a good feeling when you can see the results of that.
Right, and I find that to be, especially going out west, whether it was family trips with the Hokie storm chases, later, of course, with more models and more technology available, it's very easy to get trapped in the model world and believe everything that the models are saying through the numerical prediction. And I know there's been several times on some of the storm chases out west where I'll look at the models and we'll spend some time in a hotel room looking at, what's the HRRR saying, what's the RAP saying, what's it look like, so you build up this feeling for it, and you walk outside and you look at the clouds, you feel the air, say, that's not right. There's no low level shear here. The wind's not even blowing, that kind of thing. And so, it really does, it helps you get that intuitive feel that comes with some experience of, hey, oh yeah, that really feels like 65-degree dew points that, today, kind of thing. I mentioned, or I touched on pet peeves. Like I said, it wasn't really one of my pet peeves, but do you have any pet peeves associated with the whole idea of weather, blogging, social media, anything that comes to mind?
Something big comes to mind for me right now. Last week, a year-old blog post of mine made the rounds of Facebook. People weren't paying attention to the date. It says January 20, 2016. But the forecast was for 1 to 2 feet of snow, and it was fairly apocalyptic. I try to be very calm and rational until the point that I think it's important to blow the horn. I mean, I want to blow the horn when it's time to blow the horn, not 5 days before, because one frame of the GFF ensembles shows a snowstorm. So this post made the rounds of Facebook, and by late in the day, it started coming back on my feed, some of my friends, and it's like, they were talking like this was this week's forecast, and it wasn't, of course. This snowstorm, there were a couple of 12, 13-inch reports around Williamsburg, but mostly there was never any expectation this was going to be a foot or more snow anywhere in Virginia or anywhere else. So we fought the battle mitigating this disaster this week. I guess it was a blog hit bonanza. It went into 6 figures very quickly. But for me, the reputation I've tried to build is to be kind of level until it's time to start to raising my voice a little bit about weather. And this kind of undermined all that. That I'm out 4 days ahead of time with people thinking I'm forecasting 1 to 2 feet of snow, and I'm the only one out there. Nobody else was calling for it, and I heard a lot about it. I think we did a good job mitigating it, and I have a column in the paper tomorrow about it, this whole situation. But just social media is such a immediate thing, and if something can become viral, so to speak, very quickly. And all people had to do was look at the date. In fact, there not only did we have a date on it, but there were 3 different dates inside a National Weather Service graphic at the top, 4 times above the headline, January 2016, and yet people thought it was January 2017.
How about you, John?
I'm glad I have not encountered that yet. I don't know if it's a pet peeve, but something kind of came to mind for me as, well, here's an area where I can do better, or we can do better, is, you get done talking about the weather. This is actually something that really more occurred, I think, on the TV side of things. And whether it's, a friend or a coworker or somebody you encounter, it's like, okay, yeah, but what do you really think is going to happen? Well, no, I just told you everything I know. There's no secret weather forecast. So that's always a challenge to me. Like, okay, there's something I can make clearer, or there's always a better way. You know, self improvement. You got to be your best self. And the other thing about social media, I was kind of been kicking around the past month is getting really fired up about the challenges of weather on social media. This is just going to keep happening every winter, you know, and every spring when it comes to severe weather outbreaks, and every summer when it comes to crazy hurricane tracks 14 days in the future. It's not going away. Therefore, one person didn't create it, one person can't solve it. So you just do the best you can and hope that people see that you're doing that and turn to you and trust you.
The fake news crisis in politics this election season, weather people are like, hey, this is old news to us. We've been dealing this for 10 years, 5-10 years. I mean, the one frame of the ensembles that's turned into a forecast, the threat of a major hurricane, 2 weeks out, all that kind of garbage. We've dealt with this for a very long time, not to mention all the fake photos or photoshopped photos that go around that are, that's a 1990 event. It's been repurposed to be just taken just now from this hurricane or that tornado.
Yeah. I'd have to throw into the mix. I have a problem with people relying too much on these things. And I mean, by that, I mean technology in general. And my main point is this is, just as an example, Kevin knows when he's gone with me, when I'm on this Hokie storm chase with him, I'm the one that brings paper maps. I'll have those big, nice DeLorme atlases for every state that we go in. And I use those here in Virginia too. Why? Because you never know when the phone's going to die, you run out of signal or whatever.
Or the map's wrong.
Or the map's wrong. Google Maps is wrong, which has happened more than once. But and I'm not picking on Virginia Tech students. I'm just making a general statement. But that meteorology program is embedded in the geography department. I hand the maps to geography students, and they can't read it. And not everyone. I mean, there are some that can, but most people can't find where they are on a map. That's my point. And what I find in writing the weather blog, in specifically for Fredericksburg, and again, it's a fairly restricted geographic area that I'm writing for, and I bring that up. I talk about the city and the surrounding counties, but then I'll post. I usually will post some kind of graphic on a blog, whether it's a satellite image or a map or QPF totals or whatever, and I find that I always have to put a star. Mm-hmm. Right where Fredericksburg is, because people cannot, the majority of people cannot look at a map and figure out where they are. And I've got a gripe about that, and I think it's because people let this become their brain, and that's my pet peeve. So
I've started to have to do that too a lot. I get, where's Roanoke on this map, and so I can't mark every town on it, but I'll put the star or the circle, and this is Roanoke, and hope that people in Fincastle or Floyd or somewhere can figure out where they are relative to Roanoke at least.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'll just say I feel slightly guilty about putting a star on Richmond because it's not Roanoke, the Star City. Every time I do that when I'm building a map, I think about that. This is wrong. The star belongs on Roanoke. But on most maps, capital city is indicated by a star, so it makes sense, I think, for the people that are using it. That's just one thought about that. I guess the other is I do think it's different in different parts of the country. The landmarks that people relate to when it comes to a weather forecast or storm tracking as it's occurring, and warning situations. Having lived in different cities and fielding questions in different markets, you get a sense like, roads are what make the most sense in this area. And sometimes you're lucky enough, like in Southwest Virginia, to have kind of sub-regional names that really do, I think, resonate with people. You say Allegheny Highlands, you know if you're in it or not, I would think. New River Valley, so Mountain Empire, Southside, although Southside means different things in different parts of Virginia.
It does.
I'm learning that. But it seemed like in Georgia, counties weren't as confusing. Like people really resonated with that. And my theory might have been that a lot of the high schools were named such and such county high school. So there was kind of a sense of ownership tied to that name, that maybe if you knew you went there, your kids went there, you knew you were in that county. So the county maps and county labels didn't seem to be a source of a lot of questions when it came to storm tracking in Georgia and forecasting in Georgia.
Right, and that does bring up a good point. I should mention this too, that in the Fredericksburg area, the majority of the population of Fredericksburg did not grow up there. People move into that area for jobs in the DC area, and they come from all over the place, all over the country. And so they may not have grown up, for instance, at that high school, or may not know all the areas. So, and that there's a constant influx or flux, I should say, people moving in, people moving out. So that sense of identity of where you are is probably not as obvious as other places. That's a good point. Well, we're coming up. In fact, we just hit the 1 hour mark, and I don't want to belabor this too long unless we have some really hot topics we want to continue talking about. Anybody have anything? I have one question, one thing I want to wrap up with. Anybody have any thoughts? Things you want to kind of finish up with? Crickets. Okay. All right. So since we're in the weather business, what are some of your favorite websites to go to? Your go-to websites for weather, the URLs. What would you say there? Start with you, John.
What would I go through every morning? WeatherBell's going to be on that list. I'm really a fan of College of DuPage site, with the clickable soundings. I'm a heavy BuffKit user. For people that haven't used it and don't know what it is, you're talking about model soundings. So the vertical temperature and dew point and wind structure of the atmosphere. So it's not just looking at what's happening at the ground, but the cross section all the way up. And having ways to do that are so important. I feel like if I haven't looked at a sounding when I'm making a forecast, I haven't really made a forecast. So anything that can help me with that. Really a fan of the Tropical Tidbits page.
Yes.
Don't know if I already said that. Yeah. And there are just so many out there. So I wouldn't want to leave any out, but there are a lot of people making really good maps right now.
Kev, what do you think?
I'm still a fan of a lot of the government-based websites, SPC, WPC, National Hurricane Center when it's appropriate. And I, every day when people ask me what weather websites to look at or what, apps on their phone, I don't point them to these big private companies that everybody can name, that'll go nameless like AccuWeather and the Weather Channel. But, I point them more to just look at your, National Weather Service at Blacksburg, National Weather Service at Sterling or in Wakefield. Those guys and gals that work there, they know their area. They know the intricacies of their area. And that's a lot of times what I point, what's the most accurate forecast? Well, I still think the Weather Service is good, beats those. And I make sure I read their discussions and everything before I, even if I'm already have a totally different idea of what's going to happen, I want to be able to answer questions I'm going to get through the day from people who are, well, why is the Weather Service saying this? And Channel 7 saying this, and you're saying this, and that guy in Richmond that I can't think of his name right now, but he's saying this, and I want to know that ahead of time. But that's and I go on a couple different model websites. American Weather is one that I hit a lot. I like the color schemes that they're on that website. When I cut out a model map, which I don't run model maps except when I really think there's a compelling reason to, because people get all kinds of ideas from them. But I like the color scheme; they reproduce well. So that would be a few of mine. And some of the ones that John mentioned, I've hit some of those too.
I forgot a big one, if you'll allow me. Iowa State. Everything that goes on with the IEM sites, that's huge for me. And I think I thought maybe too specifically about it, but all the NOAA websites are indispensable. And I think really, more people who don't already use it need to use the local Weather Service pages regularly. Again, always try to have great relationships with the local Weather Service offices, no matter which city I've been in. And the whole thing about the local expertise and the caring and the commitment that they have, it really reflects in the work that they do.
Right. and I agree. And specifically, when I do a blog, I'll open up 3 tabs immediately. The first tab is College of DuPage for models. Second tab is the WPC site, because not only do I like what they put out, but they've got all the links to all the other INSEP centers up top that you can go to, CPC or SPC or whatever. And the third tab is, in my case, would be the Sterling website, this specific for Fredericksburg, and type in the zip code kind of thing. And if I want to do some other graphics, I'll go look at Tropical Tidbits. And I'll also look at, if you haven't looked at it for a while, it's Pivotal Weather. It has some really good graphics as well. But those first three are the ones that my go-tos. And then I'll maybe pick up a couple places where I'll go to satellite views and look at, at either visible or water vapor kind of things. But, I would agree. And when I get the same kind of question, where do you go to? Where should I go to? I tell them weather.gov. Go to weather.gov, type in the zip code, and you got it. And for all the reasons that both of you guys have stated there, it's the commitment, the experience, and the fact that, they're the backbone. That's where the data comes from, is from those guys and gals. So any other thoughts before we wrap it up here?
Certainly interesting to talk to a few fellow newspaper weather bloggers. There were very, very, very few of us 10 years ago. I get an email every once in a while from somewhere far off, like San Antonio, or someone says New Jersey, about starting up a weather blog, and they would find me because there weren't very many of us. I'm kind of glad to see this. Newspapers have challenges now with circulation, older population dying off, younger people don't read physical newspapers as much as they used to, and get their news from many other sources. So I'm kind of glad to see that weather is becoming an intricate part of newspaper coverage, and I think it will benefit. And of course, it should be noted that we're all under the same newspaper family here with Fredericksburg, Richmond, and Roanoke under the BH Media umbrella. So I hope it will benefit each of our publications and our company in general.
Amen. So.
Very well put. My closing thought would be, the formats may change and the content may change slightly, but weather is never going to end. We're always going to need a really good source for it when a snowstorm is coming or a tornado is headed to their house. So as long as you can make it accurate and relevant and interesting, there's always going to be a place for it. And I love that publications are more and more getting into this, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Cool. Well, why don't we wrap up with this? How about given how people can find your blog, and if you want people to be able to contact you, maybe what your social media information is. Start with you, John.
All right. Twitter @BoyerWeather, one word. And I also have a Facebook page as well. It's my name, John Boyer. And on richmond.com/weather, that's the URL. That's where we're putting all the stories that I write. And my stories also appear on page B3 most days of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And if there's the snow word in it, it might be on B1 or A1.
Okay, how about you, Kevin? How can people find you and your blog?
Well, it's easy to remember. If John's is richmond.com weather, mine is roanoke.com/weather. Didn't used to be that simple, but it is now. I'm also on Twitter at Kevin Myatt WX, all run together. Kevin Myatt, MYATT WX. I have a Facebook page. It's Kevin Myatt's Weather Journal. I have a personal page, but my weather page is Kevin Myatt's Weather Journal. And there's probably some I'm forgetting, but that will pretty well find me.
Okay. And mine would be. Well, I'll start with my social media stuff. I did put up a Fredericksburg Weather Facebook page. So if you just look on Facebook for Fredericksburg Weather, that'll come up. But the blog itself is on fredericksburg.com, and you could search on there. It's changed a couple of times based on formats. I would say fredericksburg.com/weather, but I think it's been changed. But just if you go to the fredericksburg.com page and search for it. I'm on Twitter at Chris CHRISVAWX. So if anybody wants to follow that, and that's typically, I usually just follow, most people I follow are weather geeks anyway. So that's pretty much what you see. And on Facebook is Chris White. So That's kind of my deal there, and I've enjoyed the chat. We'll have to maybe schedule another one and talk about it maybe when John's got a few more months under his belt.
Yeah, that's right. My default answer to a lot of things is ask me at the end of the winter. We'll see how bad the winter is before we know a lot of things.
All right. Well, with
How many
that,
storms I get wrong or right.
exactly. And on that note, we will terminate the broadcast here, and we'll come back and maybe chat later. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Have a good night.
Thank you, Chris.